They erased a border, and drew a line the West dares not cross. It happened far from the skyscrapers of New York or the palaces of Europe, in a sunlit square where 3 flags swayed as if breathing the same wind. In that moment, Namibia, Zambia, and Botswana stopped being 3 separate stories. They became a single chapter that could rewrite Africa's destiny. For 140 years, the lines drawn in Berlin had divided families, crippled trade, and fed foreign empires. But with a stroke of political courage, those lines began to vanish. No passports. No gates. Just the right to walk across your own land. Yet, behind the celebrations, a storm was gathering. In distant capitals, men in tailored suits whispered about containment. Intelligence cables flashed warnings. Because they knew, a borderless Africa is not just a dream, it is a threat to the order they built. If you believe Africa's story deserves to be told by Africa's voice, like this video, subscribe, and stay with us. The next 5 minutes will take you inside the alliance that has the West on edge, and the twist they never saw coming. On October 24, 2023, during Zambia's 59th Independence Day in Windhoek, Namibia's Minister of Home Affairs, Albert Kawana, stepped to the podium with a smile that masked the weight of history. His words were simple, but their echo was seismic. Namibians and Zambians would soon cross their shared border with nothing more than a national ID card. No passports. No fees. No colonial gatekeepers. It was a promise born from an earlier pact between Namibia and Botswana, now extended to forge a 3-nation corridor of trust. And as the applause rolled over the crowd, few realized they were witnessing the quiet demolition of one of Africa's oldest walls. They say history moves slowly, until the day it doesn't. The day Namibia, Zambia, and Botswana stood shoulder to shoulder. History didn't just move, it leapt. What began as a ceremonial handshake was, in truth, a demolition. A demolition of borders born in Berlin in 1884, when men who had never walked African soil drew lines with rulers and ink, slicing through tribes, rivers, and futures. For over a century, those lines held like prison bars. President Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah knows those bars well. As a teenager, she fought the apartheid regime of South Africa. Living in exile from Zambia to the Soviet Union, learning that freedom is never granted, it is taken. That same fire now fuels her presidency. And this time, the bars aren't just breaking. They're disintegrating. The Borderless ID Pact isn't a bureaucratic convenience. It's a strike at the very architecture of colonial control. For farmers in Katamamulilo, it means taking their produce to markets in Seshik without paying bribes or waiting for a stamp. For traders in Livingstone, it means a single day's journey to Walvis Bay without the cost and delay of a passport. For families split by an arbitrary line, it means seeing loved ones without paperwork as a gatekeeper. The West, of course, reads the subtext. In Washington, London, and Brussels, analysts see more than regional cooperation. They see a supply chain unshackled from their control. Namibia's uranium and offshore oil. Zambia's copper. Botswana's diamonds. 3 resources that, together, can punch a hole in the monopoly of Western markets. It is no coincidence that Namibia's Atlantic port connects directly to Zambia's copper belt via the Walvis Bay Development Corridor, a route that now faces no internal border friction. This is where the tension deepens. Because in the global economy, logistics is power. The same way the interstate highway system transformed America's domestic market in the 1950s, knitting New York to Los Angeles. Farms to factories, the free movement of goods in southern Africa could knit together an economic giant. And giants, once awake, are hard to control. Nandi-Ndaitwah's strategy mirrors the Sahel alliance, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, nations that tore up old treaties, seized control of gold and uranium, and told their former rulers, enough. Those moves sent shivers through Paris, ripples through Wall Street. Now, in the south, a similar current is building, but with minerals that power not just jewelry, but the green energy revolution, batteries, solar panels, nuclear fuel. The narrative from Western capitals is familiar. They will talk of risks to stability and regional insecurity. They will flood op-eds with concern for human rights. But beneath the rhetoric is a simpler fear that Africa, if united, might stop exporting raw wealth at a discount and start dictating terms. That Africa might do what America once did, refuse to be a colony and write its own trade laws. This isn't hypothetical. In March 2025, just days after taking office, Nandindaitwa nationalized Namibia's oil and gas sector, stripping contracts from giants like Total Energies and Shell, bringing production under the president's direct office. Offshore fields could hit 700,000 barrels a day by 2030, and those barrels, under her watch, will serve Namibians first. The message was as loud as any drumbeat: Africa's resources are no longer up for grabs. For her, sovereignty is not a slogan. It is policy in motion. In April, she demanded Germany issue a formal apology and pay reparations for the genocide of the Herero and Nama peoples, over 100,000 lives erased between 1904 and 1908. When Berlin offered symbolic gestures, she called them insulting. This was not a museum debate. This was the head of state of a resource-rich country telling a European power, "We remember. We demand." And still, she moves faster. On August 12, 2025, she rejected a Bill Melinda Gates Foundation trial for an 8-year hormonal IUD, calling it a profound injustice and vowing Namibia would not be a testing ground for foreign experiments. The applause online was deafening. Hashtags turned her name into a rallying cry. But applause does not shield against pushback. History shows what comes next. Sanctions. Smear campaigns. Leaked intelligence reports painting her as a destabilizer. The same tactics aimed at Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso, Assimi Goïta in Mali, Abdourahmane Tidiane in Niger. The West's playbook is an open secret, but knowing the play doesn't make it easier to block. Still, there's a shield: unity. And that's why this ID pact matters beyond convenience. It's a thread sewing 3 flags into one fabric. Each crossing without a passport is a statement: we decide where Africa begins and ends. In the streets of Lusaka, shopkeepers already imagine a customer base tripling overnight. In Gaborone, diamond traders whisper about setting prices not in London, but in African exchanges. In Walvis Bay, dockworkers watch the port cranes swinging containers bound for markets the West does not control. And they smile. This is where you, watching now, become part of the story. If you believe courage like Nandindaitwa's should be more than a headline, share this video. Leave a comment. Tell the algorithm that Africa's voice matters. Because in this digital age, even revolutions need bandwidth. The handshake in Windhoek was more than protocol. It was a shot across the bow of an old empire. And in the war for sovereignty, symbolism is ammunition. The question is, will the world hear it as a warning or an invitation? The Walvis Bay Corridor is more than a road. It is a spine, a living artery of steel and asphalt stretching from the Atlantic's restless waters deep into the copper belt of Zambia and the diamond fields of Botswana. Every mile of it is a sentence in a story the West never wanted Africa to write. When the Borderless ID Pact took shape, it did not merely open gates, it supercharged this artery. Goods that once idled for days at dusty border posts now glide through in hours. For the logistics world, that's not a small adjustment, that's a revolution. And revolutions in trade have consequences measured in more than GDP. In the United States, they still talk about how the Transcontinental Railroad in the 19th century rewrote the nation's destiny. Binding coasts, multiplying markets, and creating industrial giants. In southern Africa, the Walvis Bay Corridor, freed from colonial-era choke points, is poised to do the same, but with minerals the 21st century can't live without. Namibia's uranium doesn't just light bulbs, it fuels nuclear reactors from Asia to Europe. Zambia's copper isn't just wire, it's the veins of every smartphone, every electric vehicle. Botswana's diamonds aren't just jewelry, they're industrial cutting tools, symbols of precision and power. Together, these resources form a triad so potent it could shift global supply chains away from their familiar northern anchors. And this is where the tension grows. The Western-dominated trade system was built on Africa's fragmentation, on making sure a miner in Zambia couldn't easily sell to a smelter in Namibia without layers of foreign facilitation. The Borderless ID Pact slices through that model. Now, a truckload of copper cathodes can roll straight to Walvis Bay and sail for Asian markets without ever seeing a Western customs seal. In boardrooms from London to New York, that image is more than inconvenient, it's alarming. Because supply chains are not just commerce, they're leverage. Control the bottlenecks. And you control the players. Remove the bottlenecks, and you free the game. President Ndaitwah understands that liberation is as much about cargo manifests as it is about flags. That's why her administration isn't just celebrating the ID Pact, it's doubling down with infrastructure. Expanded port cranes at Walvis Bay. Modernized rail links to Lusaka. Cold storage facilities for agricultural exports so that a mango picked in Livingstone can be sold fresh in European supermarkets under African shipping terms. The synergy is unmistakable. Zambia gets ocean access without paying a premium through foreign-controlled ports. Botswana can diversify beyond diamonds, sending beef, coal, and manufactured goods directly to global buyers. Namibia becomes the indispensable bridge, the platform that turns landlocked economies into maritime traders. And it's not just about trade. Economic integration fuels political leverage. A Namibia that supplies uranium to its neighbors gains not just customers, but allies. A Zambia that relies on Namibian port access has a stake in defending Namibia's sovereignty. A Botswana that sells through the corridor gains incentive to keep that corridor secure. This is how alliances stop being paper agreements and become living, breathing communities of interest. The West, watching this unfold, will not remain passive. Their playbook often begins with offers, partnerships dressed in the language of development aid, infrastructure loans tied to subtle conditions. If that fails, they pivot to pressure, environmental audits, trade disputes, currency speculation designed to test the resolve of fragile economies. And if the stakes are high enough, they resort to narratives, framing leaders like Ndaitwah as strongmen in a thinly veiled attempt to delegitimize their mandate. But here's the twist they don't admit out loud: the more they push, the more these alliances solidify. History's irony is that external pressure often forges internal unity. Just as the Great Depression bound American states under federal programs. Economic storms may bind southern African nations under a shared shield of sovereignty. In Gaborone, planners are already sketching a vision of diamond auctions held in African cities, setting benchmarks for global markets instead of accepting them. In Lusaka, engineers talk of smelting more copper domestically, capturing value before it leaves the continent. In Windhoek, policymakers dream of an African commodities exchange headquartered not in London or Chicago, but on African soil, a place where futures contracts reflect African realities. Not foreign speculation. These are not idle fantasies. The Sahel Alliance has shown that coordinated resource control can bend markets. By synchronizing gold sales, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have extracted better terms from buyers who once dictated prices. Now, with uranium, copper, and diamonds on the table, the Southern Alliance could do the same on an even grander scale. But the window for action is not infinite. Global demand for these minerals is surging now, driven by the green transition. Electric vehicles, solar farms, and next-generation electronics are consuming copper and uranium at unprecedented rates. If the alliance can position itself as a reliable, sovereign supplier during this boom, it can lock in decades of favorable trade. If it hesitates, intermediaries, the very forces it seeks to displace, will reassert control. This urgency is why every kilometer of new rail, every legal reform, every border post removed matters. Sovereignty is not won in speeches alone, it's secured in the quiet efficiency of moving goods from mine to market without asking anyone's permission. For ordinary citizens, this might seem distant. But ask the shopkeeper in Sashik who no longer waits days for stock to clear customs. Ask the farmer in Mon whose beef reaches European buyers fresher than ever. Ask the miner in Kitwe who sees his copper leaving for Asia without detouring through foreign-owned ports. For them, the alliance is not an abstract geopolitical gambit, it is the difference between stagnation and growth. Between dependency and dignity. And for you, watching this story unfold, the question is clear: will you let this moment pass unnoticed, or will you be part of amplifying it? If you believe in an Africa that moves on its own terms, share this story. Add your voice to the chorus that refuses to let borders drawn in a foreign capital dictate African futures. The Walvis Bay Corridor is more than a trade route. It is a statement that Africa will not be told where it can trade, with whom, and on what terms. It is the steel spine of a new chapter. And as long as its lanes are open and its cranes are lifting, the Southern Alliance will stand as both a marketplace and a manifesto. Every revolution meets its counterforce. For the Southern Alliance, the first wave of resistance comes not from armies, but from headlines. In glossy Western publications, op-eds begin to appear, dressed in the language of concern, but seeded with doubt. Will Namibia's bold resource policies scare away investment? Can Zambia sustain growth without Western partners? Is Botswana risking its diamond reputation? It's a familiar pattern. Plant the question, let it fester, and watch markets flinch. In London commodity exchanges, whispers about supply instability creep into pricing models. In Washington think tanks, analysts debate contingency measures to protect strategic mineral access. The real audience isn't the public, it's the investors, insurers, and intermediaries who decide whether capital flows or dries up. And yet, the alliance's leaders anticipated this. President Nandindaitwa's team has been building alternative financial back channels, courting investors from Asia, the Middle East, and even Latin America, regions less inclined to lecture and more willing to negotiate on equal terms. The message is clear: the era of single-source dependency is over. But external pressure isn't the only storm. Inside each nation, the reforms that fuel integration also disrupt entrenched interests. In Namibia, the nationalization of oil and gas has sidelined local elites who profited from foreign partnerships. In Zambia, copper beneficiation plants threaten traders who made fortunes exporting raw or without domestic processing. In Botswana, the push to diversify beyond diamonds ruffles networks tied to the old export model. These are not abstract political frictions, they are potential fault lines. And the West knows how to exploit them. History is full of examples where economic reform was sabotaged from within by those whose profits were threatened. It is the oldest trick in the book: when you cannot break the wall from outside, you pay someone to weaken it from inside. This is why the alliance's survival depends on more than infrastructure, it requires loyalty. Not just among leaders, but among the middle layers of bureaucracy, the provincial governors, the port managers, the customs officers. One corrupt signature at a border post can undo 100 speeches about sovereignty. Neighboring nations watch with mixed emotions. Angola, rich in oil but reliant on foreign operators, sees both opportunity and risk in joining. Zimbabwe, eager to break sanctions and isolation, eyes the alliance as a lifeline, but also fears becoming the lightning rod for Western retaliation. South Africa, the region's traditional economic heavyweight, hesitates, balancing its BRICS commitments with deep ties to Western markets. And yet, momentum has its own gravity. Trade numbers from the first months of the ID Pact show a surge in cross-border traffic. Markets in Livingstone report new Namibian goods on shelves. Namibian ports are logging increased volumes from Botswana. Each transaction, no matter how small, strengthens the argument for expansion. The Sahel Alliance offers a template. When Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger first dismantled colonial-era security arrangements, neighbors doubted their durability. But as the bloc survived sanctions, assassination attempts, and media isolation, the skepticism faded. Now, the Southern Alliance faces the same test: can it outlast the initial turbulence? Part of the answer lies in making the benefits visible. If a farmer in rural Zambia can cross to Namibia and sell at a better price, that story must be told. If a Namibian youth finds work in Botswana without a work visa, that story must circulate. These are not just human interest pieces, they are political armor. They make the alliance not an abstract treaty, but a lived reality worth defending. The West will adapt its approach. Expect offers to individual members, trade deals designed to appeal to short-term needs but undermine collective bargaining power. In diplomatic circles, they call it bilateral engagement. On the street, it's called divide and conquer. The only antidote is discipline: no member signs alone what they would not sign together. In private meetings, alliance leaders are already discussing a charter that would formalize this discipline. Modeled partly on the AES in the Sahel, it would require consensus for major trade and resource agreements, creating a united front not just in speeches, but in law. But such unity requires trust. And trust takes time, a commodity the alliance may not have in abundance. The geopolitical clock is ticking. The same mineral wealth that empowers these nations also paints targets on their backs. Uranium, copper, diamonds, in times of global scarcity, these are not just resources, they are magnets for interference. There is also the question of scale. 3 nations can move faster than 15. But they cannot carry the weight of continental transformation alone. This is why expansion is on the table. Angola's oil, Zimbabwe's platinum, South Africa's industrial base, each could amplify the alliance's leverage. Yet each also brings its own vulnerabilities. Expansion is both a prize and a peril. For citizens, the choice feels less abstract. In Lusaka, bus fares to Windhoek have dropped as paperwork vanished. In Gaborone, shopkeepers now source Namibian goods without middlemen. In Walvis Bay, dockworkers talk about steady shifts instead of seasonal spikes. These are the quiet dividends of integration, the proof that unity pays in more than symbolism. But the leaders know symbols matter too. In the coming months, there is talk of a joint military exercise, not as a provocation, but as a signal. The alliance is prepared to defend its economic arteries. There is discussion of a shared scholarship fund for students from all three countries, to invest in the next generation of leaders who will inherit this experiment in sovereignty. And this is where the tension sharpens. The more the alliance grows in capacity and vision, the more it disrupts the equilibrium of the region, an equilibrium that has, for decades, balanced Western influence against African aspirations. Breaking that balance is both the goal and the danger. For those of us watching, the question remains, will the alliance navigate this turbulence intact? Or will the forces arrayed against it succeed in slowing its rise? The answer will not come in a single dramatic moment, but in 1,000 decisions, quiet and loud, that either reinforce or erode the bonds between these nations. If you believe those bonds are worth strengthening, say so. Leave a comment. Let leaders know their citizens, and the world, are watching. Because the time to defend a revolution is not when it is attacked, but when it is still building its walls. It begins quietly. Not with troops at the border, but with headlines that feel off. Reports of political instability in Lusaka. Rumors of cabinet disagreements in Windhoek. Allegations of corruption in Gaborone. No sources named. No evidence shown. But repeated just enough to feel true. This is the soft war, fought not with rifles, but with narratives. Every distorted headline, every anonymous quote, is a drop of acid on the bonds between allies. And in the age of instant media, it spreads faster than any convoy can move. Then come the numbers. Sudden fluctuations in currency markets. Credit ratings quietly downgraded by agencies headquartered thousands of miles away. Foreign investors pulling out of infrastructure projects. Citing uncertainty. The corridors that just months ago hummed with optimism now feel the drag of manufactured doubt. Intelligence leaks, whether real or fabricated, suggest divisions within the alliance. A Zambian official concerned about Namibia's resource nationalism. A Botswanan minister uncomfortable with foreign policy alignment. None of it confirmed, all of it amplified. Divide and conquer wrapped in the silk of plausible deniability. If the West has perfected one art, it is pressure without fingerprints. Aid packages delayed, technical issues, at ports reliant on foreign equipment. Offers of bilateral deals too tempting for struggling sectors to refuse. Each move calibrated not to provoke open defiance, but to erode the sense that unity is the safest path forward. And yet, perhaps the most dangerous weapon is distraction. Regional crises, some genuine, some suspiciously timed, pull leaders' focus inward. A spike in cross-border cattle theft diverts Botswana's security forces. A sudden scandal over land rights absorbs Namibia's parliament. A controversial mining concession dispute consumes Zambia's headlines. The oxygen for integration is consumed by the fires of domestic chaos. The twist is not that these tactics exist, history has shown them in the Sahel, in Central America, in Southeast Asia. The twist is how early they have arrived here. The alliance is barely formed, yet already shadowed by the kind of campaigns that usually hit in year 5 or 10. It is a sign of just how threatening this unity appears to those invested in Africa's fragmentation. But there is another, quieter danger: fatigue. Sovereignty is not a sprint, it is a marathon. And marathons break not at the start, but in the long, grueling middle when the crowds thin and the road stretches endless. If the alliance cannot keep its own people engaged, cannot make the benefits visible, tangible, and personal, then no amount of high policy will hold it together. The map of southern Africa may not yet show it. But the real borders now are invisible, drawn in perception, trust, and resolve. And in this kind of war, the front line is not just at a port or a customs gate. It's in the newsroom. On the trading floor. Inside the mind of every citizen deciding whether unity is worth the cost. The Southern Alliance was never just about crossing borders. It was about crossing a threshold, from a past written by others to a future authored by its own people. In the markets of Lusaka, in the ports of Walvis Bay, in the diamond halls of Gaborone, the proof is already there: unity works. It feeds, it trades, it protects. And it does something rarer still: it inspires. But inspiration is fragile if left alone. It needs voices. It needs witnesses. It needs you. If the spirit of this alliance has touched you, don't let it fade into another forgotten headline. Like this story. Share it. Subscribe to keep the light on it. And tell others, because the world will forget unless we remind them. The borders they erased were drawn in ink. The lines they are writing now are drawn in courage. And those lines can last, if we keep them bold.